I've had a few long, unwieldy conversations with fellow Christians, Protestants, and Catholics, where we quote back and forth each other's observation and then try to point out what the error in it is, and or why it isn't correct according to our theological understanding. Now, Reaching the Lost has made a lengthy rebuttal to one of my videos where I'm basically just using talking points to explain certain things. And of course, it does bear delving deeper into the subject. And I can eventually and will eventually do that with a written outline as well. But I just want to point out in the beginning of the conversation in his rebuttal to my video is that he mentions the subject of free will. And free will, of course, is important to theological Protestant theology and Protestant apologists because they believe that God is this incomprehensible being who has no body parts or passions, has no gender, and is just a free-floating spiritual essence of some kind that has all power and all knowledge. And the weird part about it is all of this knowledge is just focused on one little planet, saving people that supposedly have free will and choose the wrong things. Now, free will in Protestant apologetics is essential because if God did in fact have a blank slate, then you have to ask yourself, well, why would he create a situation knowing beforehand that it would occur that would result in misery and eventual hell for great numbers of people? A serious contradiction with a God who supposedly loves us. So the idea of free will for Protestants is to just try and make God not guilty for all the suffering that exists. But here's the fatal flaw. If we are created out of nothing, that means we are creatures that God just invented about 6,000 years ago. Creating our body out of nothing, creating Adam and Eve's body out of the dust of the earth. And then we all know that the creation of the rest of us is a very scientific process, which ultimately results in our flesh being returned to the earth. But if God just made all this stuff 6,000 years ago, then we as created beings cannot have free will. Here's the logical fallacy that Protestants rely on, that supposedly a God who can create ex nihilo, both planets and people and whatever else it decides to, that these beings have free will. They can't have free will. If I'm created or I create something out of nothing, which I can't do, but let's say I go in my backyard and I create a bunch of mud people and somehow have the power to animate them, they are an extension of me. So all humans would be an extension of their creator. So everything that you have as characteristics associated with your existence, your being, are nothing more than something that God programmed into you when you were born. And of course, certain factions of Protestantism, basically Calvinism, believe that God has predetermined everything. Only certain people are going to heaven and they're predestined to go to heaven and the rest are predestined to go to hell, which is silly doctrine if you think about it. But Protestant apologists are claiming that men choose to go to hell by not choosing to follow Jesus, when the vast majority of humanity has never had an opportunity to follow Jesus, for one thing. But this is a fatal flaw that they say created creatures, created beings can have free will. Unless your will is independent from God, it is an extension of God. Now, Latter-day Saint theology overcomes this fallacy because Joseph Smith revealed that we are sons and daughters of God and lived with God before we came to this earth. We chose Jesus Christ, but in passing through to earth where we live by faith, where we have to use our free will to make determinations, the fullness of understanding is blocked from our minds so that we're not forced to choose one way or the other. And the same is true with the idea of getting blessed or cursed the minute we do something wrong. It would affect our decision. So God leaves the things for the final judgment. And moral agency, which is similar to free will, comes from the fact that our intelligence, which is something eternal, which we don't have a great understanding about, is something that God puts in our spirit when our spirit becomes part of our mortal flesh. And then when we're resurrected, it's all together, and we are eternal beings. We're not temporary beings like Protestantism teaches. And because our eternal intelligence is separate from God, in that He didn't create it out of nothing, we actually have our own will. We actually do choose what we will do in this life, given an opportunity to be active creatures, which is what we are. And I use creatures loosely just in the fact that we're still sons and daughters of God, but we are beings and creatures in that fashion. So Latter-day Saint theology accounts and gives reason for free will. Protestantism doesn't. And so the concept of creation ex nihilo and the concept of free will are fallacies. And yet Protestant apologists use it over and over again to defend their position that God somehow is not responsible for all the people that go to hell and all of the suffering that exists in the world.